So Keir Starmer, he kicked off his local election campaign for Labour just a few days ago, saying that if Labour were in power, it could have avoided the cost of living crisis. Is that true? So he's calling on voters to send a message to Boris Johnson over his pathetic response to that crisis. Is he right? Let's speak to Portia Berry-Kilby. She's a political commentator and she joins me now. Portia, good to have you with us tonight.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So yes, this is the local election campaign. Keir Starmer kicking that off with a real attack on Boris Johnson when it comes to the cost of living crisis that we are living in. How is it though, Sir Keir Starmer believes that if Labour were in power, we wouldn't be having this crisis effectively, or at least it wouldn't be the crisis we're seeing now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a bit of baloney, shall we say. Inevitably, this was going to happen. And Keir Starmer is saying, send a message to Boris Johnson. Really, he wants votes, and that's understandable. He's not really offered any credible alternative to Boris and the cost of living. Inevitably, things have gone up. And he's saying, Labour will provide, security for jobs. It's well, that's what the Tories have given for the past 2 years during the pandemic with a huge cost of furlough. But they have protected jobs. They've given a very economically liberal plan. And Keir knows that they don't have a viable alternative in their own party. So it's just pleading for votes. And obviously he's in a comfortable place. It's the incumbents of the Tories. So it's always going to look rosy for Labour Party at this point in time anyway.
Well, he says if Labour were in power, he would be able to take £600 off bills if by introducing a windfall for tax on oil and energy and gas companies, which is what was missing with Rishi Sunak's spring statement. So could that be where Labour would be better for our pockets?
I think this is always dangerous territory. So you're going to tax someone, well, that inevitably means that prices could go up anyway, because it's not always just going to be a direct tax. There's often repercussions anyway. So it's kind of like cheery, bleary-eyed thinking, hoping it will be fine. And at the end of the day, it will inevitably, they'd probably give other grants as well. And they know that people like it if the government's going to be spending money. But that's what's got us partly into this place in the first place. I think the public obviously don't want this cost of living, but they also want fiscal responsibility from the government and realise that it can't just be spending good money after bad, and there has to be some limit to it.
I do think if we were going to blame the Tories for the cost of living crisis we're facing now, then we should blame Labour for the economic crash we saw in 2008 then, by that rationale, surely.
Well, that's a very fair point. Exactly. And it's always easy to blame the party that is in power, of course. And what is the alternative? It's always the opposition. Does that mean that's necessarily going to solve the situation? No. Obviously, Labour is going to paint the Tories as the bad guys in this situation, and they're going to pull out all of the stops to get the votes, obviously. And especially given such a long time of the Tories being the majority party, it's even easier for them to get votes, and it's even more embarrassing if they don't, because it's just another few years of Tory rule.
But does Labour, does Keir Starmer have a point in terms of the support or lack of support coming from the government when it comes to how much people are having to fork out now? I mean, today, as I said, 50% rise in gas and electricity prices coming into force. Households, 22 million households facing that rise, that 50% rise, that could be up to £700 a year. They're shelling out, and when it comes to the energy rebate, that's £150, and that not everybody would be entitled to that. And some even saying that it's not even a rebate, you'll have to pay it back. And the council tax rebates, that only certain households will get the help from that. It's not enough, is it?
Yeah. No, and it's a very tricky situation. And I think the awful thing is that there are going to be millions of people having huge bills facing them. Even those who are fairly comfortably living, an extra £600, £700 a year is a massive amount of money. That could be more than what people spend on a holiday a year. It's not just, people might not even have that in savings. So no, there is a huge issue at hand. And is the help from the government what is needed? Is it directly targeted enough? Does it even trust the public to spend the rebates as they could potentially have the common sense to spend it as they want? Not necessarily. But then there is the element of there's only so much money you can spend. And at the end of the day, I think people know that the Tories have given huge amounts of support the past 2 years in response to the COVID pandemic. And that comes, unfortunately, with limits. And there comes a time when bills are going to be sky high and the Tories can only keep on giving so much money. Whether they could definitely reform what they're doing and make it a bit more targeted and help those who are going to be the worse off, that's another point. But you can't simply create money out of nowhere.
It's interesting, actually, that Keir Starmer is going to focus on the cost of living crisis. It's something that Ed Miliband did in the general election when he stood against David Cameron and Nick Clegg at the time. And it didn't cut through. It obviously didn't cut through. He lost the general election to David Cameron in the end, but it didn't cut through. Do you think now, in these local elections, do you think it could do for Keir Starmer what it didn't do for Ed Miliband? Do you think it can reach people? People would turn to Labour as the party that can help them through this really difficult time? Will it work?
I think there's also, obviously, getting bread on the table is so important and it's bare necessity. I also think the public want to see a leader of a party who has common sense. And when you have Keir Starmer fumbling over what it means to be a woman and whether a woman can have male body parts, and there's not even a clear PR answer to that, right? Whether he's going to say yes or no, he's fumbling, not getting the right words.
What would Boris Johnson say? What can anybody say right now? I don't think there's any group. You could say one thing and you'll have one group just completely hit back, and you say another thing and another group doing the same thing. Is there a right answer there? Come on, you've got to be fair to Sir Keir. What would you say? If you were trying to be Prime Minister.
Right, I'm a woman, I don't have a male thing on my front part, right? There is a clear answer, and I think people like straight talking common sense, and I don't quite know what words are allowed on at this hour. They're probably anything. And if Keir Starmer isn't saying that, there's clearly an issue, and I think that does cut through to people. At least Boris is a bit clearer on this, and yes, having bread on the table, fundamentally important, but people also want integrity in a leader to actually say what is true and what isn't.
Well, let's see, shall we, how these local elections play out. Gosh, it's going to be a real test for Boris Johnson. He hasn't been doing so well in the recent local elections that have come about. But yes, Labour, the local elections is the 5th of May. Yes, here we go, 5th of May. Local elections, it will be a real test for Boris Johnson. Let's see how that pans out. But for now, Portia Berry-Kilby, a political commentator, really good talking to you.